Welcome to this deep dive
Yeah.
into a topic that,
Oh,
well, it seems like these days everybody's talking
yeah.
and nobody's listening.
Hmm.
And we're going to take a deep dive into listening today
Right.
based on the book You're Not Listening
Yeah.
by Kate Murphy.
Okay.
And,
I'm excited.
I feel like
Yeah.
it's something that,
It's a lost art.
well, yeah, and we're all guilty of it,
Yeah.
not listening as well as we could.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I find myself sometimes just kind of like nodding along and
Mm-hmm.
not really paying attention to what the other person's saying.
Especially with all the distractions.
Exactly.
You know.
Phones and social media and everything else.
Yeah, we have to really make an effort to listen. So, I mean, it's like a conscious effort these days.
Well, and Kate Murphy in the book, she talks about her own experiences as a journalist.
Yeah.
And
She noticed something interesting
and,
while interviewing people.
and what was it?
A lot of her interviewees were surprised by her genuine interest
Oh, wow.
and attentive listening.
Really?
Yeah, they were like taken aback by it.
Like it was something unusual?
As if it were a novelty.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
like she was doing something extraordinary just by listening to them. And she also found that this was true across the board, from like everyday people to like prominent figures.
So this isn't just like,
Yeah.
your average Joe on the street. This is like,
what's everyone.
yeah.
It's like we've forgotten how to listen.
Well, and I think, the part of it is that we're just so bombarded with information all the time.
Exactly.
It's like we're constantly being,
Our brains are overloaded.
we're constantly being stimulated.
Constantly.
And so
Yeah.
to actually just sit and listen to someone
Right.
without
Without checking our phone.
checking our phone, without thinking about what we're going to say next,
Right.
it it takes a real effort.
You know, it's a skill.
And Murphy actually cites some research in the book
Mm-hmm.
that shows that since the early 20th century,
Right.
the time we spend listening to each other has plummeted from 42% to just 24% of our waking hours.
It's almost half.
Yeah.
We've lost.
I mean, that's a huge...
Almost half the time that we
Yeah.
used to dedicate to connecting with others.
So like back in the day,
Right.
people were listening almost half the time that they were awake.
It seems like a lot.
And now...
But think about it. Like
Yeah.
back then,
Yeah.
you didn't have all these devices
No.
and distractions.
There's no internet.
Right.
There was no social media.
People had to actually talk to each other face to face,
Right.
you know?
Well, and it makes me think about like
Yeah.
how many times I've been like out to dinner with friends or family
Right.
and everyone's on their phones.
Exactly. It's like we're together, but not really.
Yeah. And it's like you're not really present.
They're not really engaging in the conversation.
We're physically there,
Yeah.
but mentally we're somewhere else.
Right. And it's sad because I think
It is.
we're missing out on so much.
We are.
You know, we're missing out on those.
Those real connections,
Yeah.
those meaningful conversations
Mhm.
that make life rich.
Well, and Murphy talks about how
Mm-hmm.
this lack of listening is
Yep.
not only affecting our personal lives, but also,
Right.
our society as a whole.
Absolutely.
She gives the example of congressional hearings.
Where they just devolve into shouting matches.
Yeah.
Nobody's listening to each other.
It's like,
They're just trying to score points.
yeah, they're just trying to make their point.
Right.
And they're not really interested in,
And hearing the other side.
in hearing the other side or
Yeah.
even having a dialogue.
Right.
It's just,
It's just a performance.
yeah.
And
she also mentions Prime Minister's questions in the UK.
which have become more about theatrics
Right.
than substance.
It's all about,
Yeah.
getting those zingers in,
Yeah.
making the other person look bad.
Right.
It's not about actually addressing the issues.
Yeah. And I think that's a real problem because if we can't even listen to each other
Right.
in those settings,
Yeah,
how are we going to solve the big problems
exactly.
that we're facing?
It's like
Right.
we're losing the ability to have civil discourse.
Yeah. And so it's like
Yeah.
we've established that listening is in decline
Right.
and it's affecting our personal lives
Yeah.
and our society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
But what's actually happening in our brains
Right.
when we are truly tuned in?
Mm. Well, this is where it gets really fascinating.
Okay.
Neuroscientist Yuri Hassan
Okay.
has done some amazing work in this area.
Okay.
And he's found
Yeah.
that when we genuinely understand someone,
Mm-hmm.
our brain waves begin to synchronize with theirs.
Really?
It's like a neural dance of understanding.
So our brains are literally getting on the same wavelength.
Precisely.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's not just like,
It's not just hearing the words.
Yeah.
Like our brains are actually connecting
yeah.
on a deeper level.
So in one of Hassan's studies,
Mm-hmm.
He had participants listen to a short story by J.D. Salinger
Okay.
called Pretty Mouth and Green My Eyes.
Okay.
And he found that
Yeah.
when participants knew the identity of the woman in the story before listening,
Right.
their brainwaves synced with the narrators.
It's amazing.
So just having that little bit of information beforehand
right.
made a difference in how their brains...
their brain activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just knowing who the woman was
Yeah.
created a deeper level of engagement and
Interesting.
understanding.
Just it's like,
It's like when you're really listening,
yeah.
you're not just passively absorbing words.
Right.
You're actively creating a shared experience with the speaker.
I mean, it's like a dance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like two dancers
Yeah.
moving in perfect harmony.
Wow.
When we're truly listening,
Yeah.
we're creating that harmony with the person we're listening to.
And that's what we've lost.
That's what we're missing.
Yeah. Right.
And this idea of shared experience leads us to another crucial aspect of listening
Okay.
that Murphy explores in the book.
And what's that?
Curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay.
She interviewed Barry McManus,
Okay.
who was a former CIA interrogator.
Wow. So he knows a thing or two about getting people to talk.
He does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did he have to say about listening?
Well, he emphasized that effective listening
Okay.
is rooted in genuine curiosity.
Oh, okay. So you have to actually want to know
Exactly.
what the other person has to say.
You have to be interested in
Yeah.
what they have to say.
And it's not just about waiting for your turn to talk
It's not about
or thinking about what you're going to say next.
formulating your response
Right.
while they're still talking. It's about
actually being curious.
being present
Yeah.
and wanting to learn
Yeah.
from the other person.
And, this reminds me of what Murphy says about
Mm-hmm.
the impact of early childhood experiences on our listening habits.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, she points out that children
Yeah.
who develop secure attachments
Okay.
with their caregivers
Yeah.
are more likely to be curious and open to new experiences
Right.
later in life.
Because they feel safe.
Yeah, they have that
It's
solid foundation.
Yeah. It
Yep.
allows them to explore the world.
So it's like,
Yeah.
when a toddler says, I do it,
Yeah.
they're not just being difficult.
Right.
They're actually trying to.
They're trying to learn.
Yeah.
They're trying to assert their independence.
Yeah, and they're curious.
And they want to figure things out for themselves.
Right, and they want to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So
And if we as caregivers, shut that down or tell them, no, you can't do that.
yeah, you're going to mess it up or whatever.
It can actually stifle their curiosity
Yeah.
and their desire to explore.
So it's like that same principle applies to us as adults.
Exactly.
Oh.
If we don't feel safe to express ourselves
If we don't feel safe to be
or
curious.
to ask questions,
Yeah,
then we're less likely to really engage in conversations.
right. And we're less likely to listen.
And we're less likely to listen to other people's perspectives.
Yeah. Oh.
So it's important to create that safe space
Yeah.
for conversation.
And speaking of conversations,
Mm-hmm.
Murphy highlights this concept of conversational sensitivity.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she uses Terry Gross
Right.
and the producers of the show Fresh Air
Okay.
as an example.
Yeah.
And so Terry Gross, obviously,
She's like a master interviewer.
yeah, she's known for her listening skills. And the producers of the show
Mhm.
are also very good listeners.
Yeah, they have to be.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that even with the same interview,
Right.
they all hear and interpret it a little differently.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Because you would think that...
You would think that they would all come away with the same
Yeah.
takeaways.
Right.
But they don't.
But they don't.
Because everyone's bringing their own unique perspective
Right.
and experiences to the table.
Yeah.
So even though they're all listening to the same words,
Right.
they're filtering it through their own individual lens.
So it's like,
Yeah.
we're all looking at the same painting.
Yeah.
But we might see different things
Right.
depending on our background,
Exactly.
our experiences,
Experience.
Yeah. And so the key here
Yeah.
is that...
Is that they don't assume they know best. They actually engage in an active discussion.
Oh, wow. So they talk about it afterward.
They compare notes.
Yeah.
They really try to get on the same page about the interview's core message.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like,
Yeah.
how often do we do that?
In our own conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we take the time to really understand
Yeah.
the other person's perspective?
Or do we just
Or do we just kind of like...
jump in with our own thoughts and
Yeah.
opinions?
And I know I've been guilty of that,
Yeah, me too.
where it's like, I'm not really listening.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for my turn to talk.
Right.
And
And I think a lot of us do that.
Yeah.
You know?
And Murphy actually mentions a sociologist named Charles Derber,
Okay.
and he distinguishes between
Yeah.
two types of responses in conversations.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What are they?
He calls them shift responses
Okay.
and support responses.
Okay.
And so a shift response
Mm.
is when you basically redirect the conversation
Right.
back to yourself.
So it's like,
Instead of,
oh, yeah, that happened to me too.
yeah, or like,
Uh.
that reminds me of the time
You think that's bad? You should hear what happened to me.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
you
Here's what's
basically,
first.
you're shifting the focus
To focus back to yourself.
back to yourself.
Yeah.
And a support response is when you encourage the speaker
Okay.
to elaborate
Right.
and share more.
So it's like,
So it's like,
tell me more about that. What
Yeah.
was that like for you?
right.
How did that make you feel?
So you're basically saying like, I'm interested.
I'm here. I'm
Yeah.
listening. I want to hear more.
And that's a really important distinction.
It is, because it shows that you're actually engaged
Yeah.
in the conversation.
And you care about,
And you care about what the other person
what the other person has to say.
has to say.
And so,
So as we move on
Yeah.
to explore more insights
yeah.
from Kate Murphy's book,
Okay.
I want you to think about this.
Okay.
Do you tend to shift or support
Okay.
the conversation?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah, you know.
I think I probably do a little bit of both.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think we all do.
But I think it's important to be aware of it
Yes.
and to try to,
To be more conscious.
to be more conscious of,
How we're responding.
how we're responding
You know.
and to try to do more supporting.
And to try to support more
Yeah.
than shifting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's something that we can all work on.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a skill that we can develop.
Okay.
And, you know.
So
that-
we've talked about,
Yeah.
the decline of listening,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about,
What happens in our brains
The-
when we listen.
and we've talked about
Well,
curiosity.
Conversational sensitivity.
Right.
Yeah.
So now
Now let's delve a little deeper
Right.
into
Yeah.
into the importance of listening to ourselves.
we're listening to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because Murphy emphasizes that
Mhm.
our inner voice
Mhm.
impacts our
Yeah.
relationships and perceptions.
So how we talk to ourselves, basically.
Yeah, and it's kind of surprising
Yeah.
how much influence that constant chatter in
Yeah.
our heads
Yeah.
really has.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, sometimes
Yep.
it feels like that voice is so loud that
Right.
I can't hear anything else.
And research actually shows
Really?
that our brains perceive our inner voices louder
Wow.
than external voices.
That's fascinating.
So think about it, like when you're
Yeah.
lost in thought,
Yeah.
it's easy to miss what someone is saying,
Hmm.
even if they're right next to you.
Right. Or like you're reading a book
Exactly.
and somebody's trying to talk to you.
Yeah, and you're like, huh. What?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You hear the words.
But they don't really register.
Yeah, you're not really listening.
Your mind is somewhere else.
Right.
And this tendency to get lost in our thoughts
Yeah.
connects to another obstacle to good listening,
Okay.
distractions.
Distraction.
And Murphy actually compares phone addiction
Oh, wow.
to substance abuse.
Really?
And it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're constantly bombarded
Yeah.
with notifications, updates that urge to just check one more thing.
I know.
It's like we've forgotten how to be present.
And it's not just our phones. It's
Oh.
also like,
It's all the things
Yeah.
competing for our attention.
yeah, all the things in our heads.
Our to-do lists.
Yeah, anxieties.
Our worries, our inner critic.
Yeah.
You know?
Like there's a whole chorus of distractions going on.
Exactly, vying for our attention.
Yeah.
And the consequences of this constant distraction are pretty alarming.
Okay, so what are some of the consequences?
Well, Murphy cites research showing that the average attention span
Okay.
has shrunk to a mere 8 seconds.
8 seconds.
Even shorter than a goldfish's.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Wow,
But 8
that's
seconds.
barely enough time to
I know.
process a thought.
It's crazy. And no wonder we have trouble focusing during conversations.
Right.
You know,
So-
we're so used to getting these little snippets
Yeah.
of information.
And then we're on to the next thing.
Yeah. It's like we're constantly
Yeah.
skimming and scanning
Yeah, and we've lost the ability to
to go deep.
to really dive into something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
And-
what can we do about it?
Well,
Like, how do we break free from this cycle of distraction
Yeah.
and become better listeners?
Well, Murphy emphasizes the importance of
Okay.
creating quiet spaces,
Okay.
both physically and mentally.
So like turning off our phones,
Yeah.
putting away our laptops.
Finding a calm environment
Yeah.
where you can just focus on the person.
Okay. In front of you.
Yeah, like giving ourselves permission to just,
To disconnect.
to disconnect.
It's all the noise.
Yeah.
And just be present.
Yeah, I remember reading the book about that salesperson, Hoff,
Oh,
at Gallery Furniture in Houston.
yeah, he was amazing.
And he had this, like, uncanny ability to connect with customers
Right.
just by listening to them.
He was a great listener.
Yeah, and he wasn't pushy.
No, he wasn't trying to.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to sell them anything.
He just wanted to understand their needs.
Yeah.
And he created a space for them to talk.
And to really figure out what they wanted.
Yeah. It was counterintuitive to what we often see in sales,
Right.
but it worked.
Yeah.
It built trust.
Yeah.
And rapport.
And so it's like listening is not just about, hearing the words. It's also about picking up on those nonverbal cues.
Yes, absolutely.
Tone of voice.
Body language.
Facial expressions.
All of that. Yeah, because nonverbal communication can actually carry more than half the emotional weight of a message.
So we're constantly picking up on those signals.
We are, even if we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Like the way somebody hesitates before they speak.
Yeah.
Or the way their eyes light up when they talk about something they're passionate about.
Exactly.
Sure.
It's like becoming a detective
Right.
of human emotion.
Yeah, trying to piece together the whole story.
And Murphy actually mentions how Terry Gross
Mm-hmm.
prefers to do phone interviews.
Really, why is that?
Because it allows her to focus solely on the guest's voice
Oh, interesting.
without being influenced by their appearance.
Oh, so she's not distracted
Right.
by how they look.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So she's really honing in
Yeah.
on the nuances of their voice, their tone,
Yeah.
their inflection, their pauses.
But don't you lose something
Well,
by not seeing them?
there is a trade-off,
Yeah.
but she feels like in that context,
Yeah.
it's more important
Yeah.
to just focus on the voice.
Right. And sometimes I guess those visual cues can be distracting.
They can be.
Yeah.
And they can even be misleading,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. So it's about being mindful of the context
Right.
and choosing the approach.
That best serves the conversation.
Yeah. That allows
Is the
for...
most genuine understanding.
Right. And speaking of context,
Yes.
Murphy also talks about
Mm-hmm.
how people communicate differently across cultures.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And she brings up this concept of linguistic relativity.
Linguistic relativity, what's that?
So it's this idea that the language we speak
Yeah.
actually influences
Yep.
how we perceive and experience the world.
So like if somebody's language
Yeah.
emphasizes spatial terms,
Right.
they might actually perceive time differently
Exactly.
than somebody whose language focuses on volume.
Yeah, and she cites this study where researchers asked Swedish and Spanish speakers
Okay.
to estimate the amount of time it took for a line to grow longer
Yep.
or a container to fill up.
Okay.
And Swedish speakers tend to describe time using distance-related terms,
Okay.
like long or short,
Okay.
whereas Spanish speakers use volume-related terms,
Right,
like
right.
big or small.
Okay. So did that actually affect how they perceived time?
It did!
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
The Swedish speakers, influenced by their language's emphasis on distance,
Yeah.
perceived the line that grew longer
Okay.
as taking more time,
Even though it didn't.
even though it actually took less.
Wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like our language
Yeah.
is actually shaping how we see the world.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so how does that relate to listening?
Well, it's crucial.
Yeah.
When we're listening to people from different cultures, we
Right.
need to be aware of these subtle linguistic differences
Yeah.
and how they might influence our interpretation
Right.
of what's being said.
Because what might mean one thing
Right.
in one culture could mean something completely different in another culture.
And we might misinterpret
Right?
what they're saying
Yeah.
if we're not aware of
Yeah.
those differences.
And so it's like we need to approach every conversation
Yes,
with curiosity and humility.
absolutely.
Be open to expanding our understanding of the world.
And sometimes that means confronting our own biases
Oh, yeah.
and preconceptions.
Yeah, because I think we often jump to conclusions
We do.
based on stereotypes or
Yeah.
assumptions.
Instead of truly listening
Yeah.
and trying to understand the individual
Right.
in front of us.
Yeah, like we might see somebody
Yeah.
and immediately form an opinion about them
Right.
based on how they look
Mm-hmm.
or
Their profession
their profession or their background.
or their background.
And it's like we're slapping a label on them.
Exactly.
without even giving them a chance.
Without even knowing them.
Yeah, to tell their story.
Right. And each
Yeah.
person has a unique story,
Right.
a unique perspective.
Yeah.
And it's only through listening
Right.
that we can truly discover
Yeah.
what makes them who they are.
And so it's about moving beyond those superficial judgments
Yes.
and recognizing the
Like
complexity.
human experience.
Yeah, and that's where the real connection happens.
Right.
When we
step outside of our own limited viewpoints
and open ourselves up.
to the world of the other.
Right.
You know?
And Murphy shares this really poignant anecdote
Yeah.
about her experience
Yeah.
at the Basilica of Our Lady of San Juan del Valle in Texas.
Oh, okay.
And people wait in line for hours
Wow.
to confess their sins
Yeah.
to the priests.
Yeah.
And the priests just listen.
They listen patiently
Yeah.
and attentively.
And so what's interesting is that these people come from all walks of life,
Different ages, backgrounds,
Yeah.
languages,
but they're all united by this.
by this shared human need
Yeah, to be heard.
to be understood,
Yeah.
to feel connected.
And the priests are just providing that space.
They are,
Yeah.
just by listening.
Yeah.
They're creating a space
For healing.
for healing,
Forgiveness.
a renewal.
Yeah, it's a beautiful illustration
Yeah.
of listening as an act of generosity.
Yeah.
You know?
And we give this gift to others.
We do.
And in doing so,
Yeah.
we also enrich our own lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder
Yeah.
that we're all connected,
Yeah.
you know?
That we all share this.
This human experience.
Yeah.
And listening is that bridge
Yeah.
that allows us to
connect.
connect, to build stronger relationships.
Or compassionate relationships.
Yeah.
And in a world that feels increasingly fragmented and divided,
Right.
I think that's a really powerful message.
It is.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder.
Yeah. What would happen if we shifted our focus
Okay.
from broadcasting to receiving,
Yeah.
from speaking to listening?
Right. What if we all committed to becoming better listeners?
Yeah.
Not just in our personal lives,
Right.
but in our workplaces.
In our communities.
Yeah.
In our politics.
Yeah.
You know?
Imagine the ripple effect.
What kind of world
Yeah.
could we create
Yeah.
if we all just listened a little bit more?
And so that brings us to the end of part 2
Okay.
of our deep dive into listening.
Great.
And in part 3,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about some specific strategies
Right.
for becoming better listeners.
I'm looking forward to it.
Oh.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of listening and some of the challenges we face in a world full of distractions.
Right. And now I'm really curious to hear about those strategies for becoming better listeners that you mentioned.
Absolutely. Well, one of the key takeaways from Murphy's book
Mm-hmm.
is that listening is not just a skill.
Yeah.
It's a virtue.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person,
Yeah.
regardless of their background, their beliefs, or experiences.
So it's about approaching every interaction
Yeah,
with respect and openness,
exactly.
even if we disagree.
Even if we don't like what they're saying,
Right.
we still listen with respect.
And that can be hard,
It can be very challenging.
especially, these days when,
Yeah, everyone's got an opinion,
everyone's got an opinion and everyone wants to share it.
and they want to be right.
Yeah. And it's like
All right.
we've lost the ability to
just listen.
to just listen and try to understand.
Without judgment,
Yeah.
without interruption,
Yeah.
you know?
And Murphy tells this funny story
Oh, yeah?
about interviewing a professor
Okay.
who kept derailing the conversation
Oh, no.
and bringing it back to his own area of expertise.
Oh, I know that type.
Yeah.
It's like they can't help themselves.
Yeah, it's like they just have to make it all about them.
And it's a perfect example of what Derber calls a shift response.
Right.
You know, the listener redirects the conversation back to themselves
Yeah.
instead of truly engaging with
Yeah.
the speaker's perspective.
And that's a form of conversational narcissism.
It is.
And it can be really damaging to relationships
Absolutely.
because it's like you're not really interested in what the other person has to say.
Right.
You're just using them as
Yeah.
a sounding board for your own ideas.
Exactly.
So how do we break free from that pattern
Well,
and become better at supporting others in conversations?
one strategy
Right.
is to simply be more mindful
Okay.
of our internal dialogue.
So like pay attention to.
Yeah. Pay attention to those moments when we're tempted to interrupt,
Yeah.
to offer unsolicited advice,
Mm-hmm.
or to steer the conversation back to our own experiences.
Yeah.
You know,
Catch ourselves
catch yourself in the
Yeah.
act of shifting
and then stop.
and then say, wait a minute, I'm
Yeah.
doing it again. I
Yeah.
need to stop and listen.
and really focus on what the other person is saying.
Exactly.
So it's like hitting the pause button
Yes.
on our own thoughts.
And just being present
Yeah.
with the other person.
Another strategy is to ask open-ended questions.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Encourage the speaker to share more.
Instead of asking questions,
Yeah.
that can be answered with a simple yes or no.
Right.
Ask questions that invite them to open up.
So instead of asking, did you have a good day?
Right.
You could ask, what was the best part of your day?
Exactly.
Or what was something that challenged you today?
Right.
Yeah, those are good.
Those kinds of questions
Yeah.
encourage a deeper level of reflection.
Yeah, and create space
Yeah.
for a more meaningful conversation.
Exactly.
Murphy also emphasizes the importance of listening to what's not being said.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the silences, the pauses,
The hesitation
the nonverbal cues, all of that.
can be incredibly revealing.
It can.
Pay attention to the speaker's tone of voice.
Right.
Body language, facial expressions.
Are they making eye contact?
Yeah.
Are they featuring?
Are they speaking quickly or slowly?
All of those things
Yeah.
can give you clues
Yeah.
about how they're really feeling.
Yeah, and it's like becoming a detective.
Exactly.
Human emotion.
Trying to read between the lines.
And sometimes the most powerful moments in a conversation are the silences.
They can be.
You know those pauses where the speaker is gathering their thoughts?
Right.
Or maybe even finding the courage to share something vulnerable.
And we need to resist the urge
Yeah.
to fill that space with our own words.
It's so hard, though.
I know it is.
Because we're so uncomfortable with silence.
We are.
But those silences are often where the real magic happens.
That's where the connection happens.
Yeah.
That's where the vulnerability happens. And that's what we're all craving.
We are.
That sense of belonging
Yeah.
and being truly understood.
And listening is the path to that.
Yeah, listening is that gift
It is.
that we give to others.
And that we receive
Yeah.
in return.
And so as we wrap up this deep dive into the power of listening,
Yeah.
let's leave our listener with a challenge.
Okay, I like that.
A challenge to embrace the silence,
Mm-hmm.
cultivate curiosity,
Yes.
and commit to becoming more attentive,
We're compassionate.
more generous listeners.
Absolutely.
Because in a world that's constantly vying for our attention,
Right.
the act of truly listening
Yeah.
is almost revolutionary.
It is.
It has the power to transform our relationship,
Our communities.
our communities, and even ourselves
And the world.
and the world.
You know.
So think about it.
Yeah.
What would happen if we all made a conscious effort to listen more deeply
To the people around us.
to the people around us?
Yeah.
That's something to ponder. As you navigate the world,
One conversation at a time.
one conversation at a time,
Yeah.